All right, well, let's launch into this thing. I'm really, really happy to have you here. This is the first event for Independent Jewish Voices Firestarter Chat. So this is an event series we're going to be doing throughout the month of October. It's Firestarter Chats because we're having people on who are stoking the flames of resistance, stoking the flames of inspiration. We're going to be talking with musicians, cultural creators, activists, poets, illustrators, podcasters, and so much more. So I want people to check out all the details. You can find it all on our website. If you go to ijvcanada.org/Firestarter Chats, it's all up there. Once we get into things, I'll post like a few comments as well too. And then if people want to ask questions, just like type in your questions for Kareem, and we're gonna do it interactive like that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very special guest for today, this evening, because it's late where he is, joining us all the way from London. We have Kareem Samara, who is a musician, an activist, a campaigner, Palestinian, based in London, and someone who I've been really looking forward to having a good excuse to interview you for quite a while. So thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing, Kareem?
Pleasure. Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, doing all right. Keeping on through all of this nonsense that we're all going through at the moment. But yeah, it's going okay. It's going okay. I'm glad to be here.
Of like coronavirus and COVID and lockdowns?
So at the moment in the UK, a lot of areas of the north have been locked down to varying degrees. Basically, like some places you can go and meet like a couple of households, I think, and then in some places you can only meet other households outside. Some places you can't go and mix households at all. Some places I don't know if they've even shut some of the hospitality and team sports in some of those areas as well. So it's varied really, but it's more local lockdowns rather than a national one at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's similar here where I am in Quebec. We just went to level red, which is the highest level in terms of.
Oh, damn.
So things are getting hairy again, and yeah. Well, I really hope people out there, keeping safe, keeping healthy. And it's a difficult time for the world, of course, a difficult time for artists. It's something I keep thinking about, and I've been interviewing a lot of artists and musicians throughout all this because you can't be gigging, you can't be touring. How have you found these times just in terms of like keeping up with your music and your art practice?
I've been having those conversations quite a lot the last few days, especially. I haven't really, is the honest truth. I had a lot of work planned from March basically until the beginning of next year, and that all got cancelled because that was in theatres, and a couple of like small tours were sort of being planned, and so that would have involved gigs in London as well and the UK, like normal kind of like oud or kind of collaboration gigs rather than just theatre shows. So they got cancelled. Otherwise, I've done one outdoor show, and that was really nice, and it was quite encouraging. But the problem was it was in Battersea Park, and it was done by the local council, and they were just very difficult, it seems, at trying to do something again. They need a long time to plan, and in these times, basically, like when things seem to be going all right, they needed to be open to allow some kind of performance. The organisers had done some shows in like sort of private square gardens that are sort of dotted around different areas of London, and that was okay because you just needed like a residence key to get into them, and it had nothing to do with the council. But this being a big council show, they need like a month, 6 weeks to plan it to them anyway, but we don't have that here. So there's been no gigs, no shows, no nothing. So I've basically been doing a couple of like small projects with friends, and yeah, just trying to survive in different ways, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult, man. And I'm not. I haven't done like an Insta performance, or I've not done a Zoom performance or anything like that. Because it's not really my thing. It's not what I want to do. I don't feel right doing it. I did a small performance on a Zoom kind of conference thing that I was invited to, and I think the connection on Zoom, for example, like it cuts out when it's music.
That's
So
it.
I mean,
They're
it's
really
weird.
hard to pull off well, I find. Like, you know, music is meant to be enjoyed in person, and indeed, it's
Mm,
sad. I can't wait till we can like get back together in concert halls, you know, in amphitheaters,
mm,
you know, in like bars, wherever people
yeah.
music to have that
And
experience.
here, like the weather is so inconsistent. Even when it was summer in London, it's not like normal summer, right? So you can't plan for like outdoor shows in different times, in at different times of the year. So it just you can't sort of just say let's move it outdoor at least for a certain amount of months, because um, it's just so unstable, the weather. So you just can't plan for it. And the venues are too, you know, like we come from like traditions that it's all about being in the smallest, sweatiest, grimiest kind of place, right, where you're this close to somebody, which is it's not going to happen. It's not
Yeah,
going to happen.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well, let's
you're not just rebelling against the system either. You're looking after people.
for sure. Let's talk
Mm.
a little bit more about your music, because I think that's, you know, really a lot of what defines your resistance voice, your activist voice, and you know what you
Mm.
as a human being in this world. So I first came across your music through a mutual friend of ours in Baltimore, Ryan Harvey. Shout out to Ryan Harvey, who was part of the Riot Folk Collective, and you know, an
Mm.
amazing singer songwriter.
Mm.
And then Ryan, with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, pulled together this incredible platform, Firebrand Records, an
Yeah.
amazing of artists from all around the world, of which you were a part. And so I know some of your prime collaborators for your music are Ryan Harvey and Shireen Lilith, who, if I'm not
Mm.
mistaken, is Dutch, based in the Netherlands.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Okay, and
Mm.
and so like I said before, you know, you Kareem Samara, you play the oud. I know you're a multi-instrumentalist, but
Yeah.
I'll just, yeah, leave it there. Tell us about your music, and you know what ideas you're trying to get across through it, and what it represents to you.
Wow. Um, so I guess the main thing is that I come from a very like rock punk kind of background in London, and that was my main thing through sort of like through high school. Hip hop as well, being with a lot of different hip hop artists. I wasn't like a hip hop performer or anything, but a lot of friends were involved in like UK garage and the grime scene, but I was very much rock and punk. And then from that, I started to notice that some of the Arabic sort of like music that I'd listened to growing up was starting to creep in. I didn't really know why or how, but I noticed it. And I'd had an oud for ages from Egypt that I'd never learnt to play. Managed to find a teacher, got playing, but then I got quite a serious RSI from just too much practice. So I had to like knock that on the head for about a year, 18 months. So I couldn't play guitar and I couldn't play the oud. And then when I came out of that, my sort of punk band had split up. And then I started Rust, which was the band that Ryan heard me in, and we started to collaborate together. And when Rust ended, me and Ryan basically went on tour to California, really. And he stole Rust oud player, as he says it. And from then, really, I'd never really done sort of solo work. I'd always been very much wanted to be in a band. I'd always been sort of like a collaborator. I'd always played different types of music with different people. And it was never like of interest to me to be like a singer-songwriter or like a solo artist or anything like that. And so being with Ryan, weirdly, in sort of like a duo at first, and then Shireen came on more permanently, it allowed me to do the sort of like band stuff with them, but then also start to develop a more of a sort of a signature sound, I guess, on my own. And then that's the sort of things that you're like sort of playing from the SoundCloud. It's like looped oud with a lot of grimy sort of not polished sounds to not be too sort of poppy, and that's still just a developing sound that has got me into doing a lot of different collaborations with different theatre groups, Smoke Poets MC, Bint Imbereh, Ruba Shamshum, Rafif Ziada a long time ago.
Which I should just mention real quick, Rafif is going to be part of this Firestarter chat series. We're doing an event with her on October 29th, which I'm really excited about.
I'll be tuning in.
Nice. Okay, sorry, I cut you off.
That's all right. So just from that, so whilst doing sort of like the more songy stuff with Ryan, I've been developing a different kind of solo sound, if you want to call it that. But yeah, definitely something that I put into different projects, whether it be theatre or film or documentary, that I've been having a couple of chats about with people. And then and then we got to here and COVID hit. So
well, I mean, you guys put out this wonderful series of EPs a little while ago, I think just over a year ago, called The Thin Blue Border. So that's again with Kareem and then Ryan, Harvey, and Shireen, Lilith. And there's a lot of really powerful themes on that album, looking primarily at the so-called migrant crisis, right? So refugees fleeing different parts of the world and trying to get into Europe, or even where we are, Turtle Island, North America. And there's tracks on there about police brutality, the Arab Spring, and what's always what I find interesting with like what you bring to the music with the oud is like, to me, and maybe just because I don't know a lot of oud music, is that it sounds like very rooted in like traditional Middle Eastern musics, and then you kind of bring it into like a more kind of folky rock kind of atmosphere or context. Tell us a little bit about like how you are contributing in a way to like this sound with Ryan and Shireen.
With Ryan stuff, it's really simple because Ryan is it's like really rooted in US protest folk, right? So you've got your kind of, tends to be like a simple chord sequence with maybe only a little bit of modulation, and as long as we kind of sort the keys out, it's very much like, I see it as sort of playing like fiddle over like Irish folk or something like that. It's I'm not playing any sort of what they call quarter notes or Arabic notes. It just happens to come from that instrument that evokes that sort of sound. And Ryan was one of those people that, actually the first time I ever spoke to Ryan, he only spoke to me because he loves the oud. He might have even been in Egypt, I'm not sure, but he like literally was on the phone going, I love the oud, I want to meet you and we should do stuff. So the oud is it was more the evocative sound, because it was something you couldn't get from the guitar, and then it was new as well. It's one of the things I don't think has been done before, and I don't think it's really been done since, where you have the Western guitar is not trying to orientalize anything, and I'm not trying to make something sound like the desert that isn't the desert. It just happens that these kind of instruments can work together, and the oud is has such an evocative sound that it brings it out to people.
Really. Cool. Yeah. Well, again, I would highly recommend that people check out those albums. The Thin Blue Border, you can find it on Spotify, like a lot of the streaming apps.
There's some videos on YouTube as well, and there might be a website that explains every song, because every song on the EPs, they deal with like very difficult themes, and Ryan's delivery and lyrics, they're straightforward, they're not metaphorical. So there's usually a story behind all of them. Like the song Thin Blue Border is about him helping take in people fleeing or crossing the I forgot the name of the Aegean Sea, is it, between Turkey and Greece, and him sort of seeing what the coast guards were trying to do to the people crossing. And so there's like always a story behind each song, and the link between Black Lives Matter, Palestine, what the uprising in Syria, Iraq, the link between the gas canisters that were being used in every country around the world to like quell protest, you know. So we've dealt with all of those kind of those things.
Nice. All right. Well, I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about Palestine solidarity, because that's what also what we're here to talk about with the Firestarter chats. Where we're here to talk about liberation struggles. We're here to talk about standing with Palestine, and I'm excited again to bring you in because, you know, a lot of the work we do with Independent Jewish Voices Canada is in the Canadian context. So we are working with Palestinian groups and our Palestinian brothers and sisters here to try to build up a BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in Canada. And I know that this is something you've been very involved in the UK over the years. Yeah. And so let's talk about the BDS movement in the UK. Maybe this is a bit of a big question, but like broadly, where do you see that movement at right
now? Where is it at? I mean, it's the kind of the awareness of it is huge, considering when I sort of first started doing any kind of campaign or activism around it. I guess that the BDS movement now is on the conscious of everybody involved. There was a lot of people in the community when I was sort of getting started and speaking to people about where the products came from, making sure that they knew where, for example, in the Arab shops, where the dates were coming from. And a lot of the conversations were basically like, it will never work. We've tried it before. This is, it's never going to do anything. No one's going to care. You won't have any power. And then it sort of started to gather and gather and gather. And then it came on to like, where I got more involved was the cultural side of BDS. So specifically like telling artists, musicians and filmmakers not to exhibit, to go and visit and play in Israel. And that really took off a lot of steam with the releasing of the Artists for Palestine first ever sort of like call that was artists saying that they weren't going to go and play in Israel and play in government supported venues, and that really just sort of kicked off. And these sorts of like actions just kept building and building and building, and we've got to a place now where, you know, it's on mainstream news whenever they talk about the criminalization of Palestinian resistance, whether it be on the ground or here, it's always talked about now. And the Zionist sort of like lobbies are using it a lot within their sort of talks with Congress and with politicians here. It's been used in Parliament, and yeah, it's caused the trouble that it was meant to cause, you know, and it has built a movement. And that's been really great to see, because when we sort of started out, it definitely it was nothing like it is now.
For sure. I mean, one of the things that I've always found with solidarity movements is when we're trying to talk to people, right? Like people who are either on the fence or who have just never heard of like Israel-Palestine before. And you can go at them with like all sorts of facts. You can give them every flyer in the world. They can attend all sorts of lectures. But then if you're able to reach people through art and through culture, it just hits them on this whole other level, right? Like as soon as Roger Waters is saying, you know, I'm not going to play for apartheid, right? It makes me think of like that amazing movement when you had like Bruce Springsteen and Jimmy Cliff and like, you know, all of these international artists in the 80s saying, you know, we're not going to go play Sun City in apartheid South Africa, right? And so people are drawing that line in the sand. I mean, can you speak a little bit to like the power of culture and of music in your case in terms of being able to reach people maybe where like an academic lecture can't?
Well, I think it's that it can speak to just so many more people if there is a message in a song, and if there is a, you know, not too much metaphor involved within a song lyric, if there is something of like the other world's music that is kind of diverse enough, but not too distracting from sort of like the other ear. So like from, in this sense, like the Western ear hearing like a Palestinian drum beat, for example, right? If you're hearing a dabka beat or something like that, it's something they can still relate to because it's upbeat. And, you know, one of the things about culture is that it's one of the first things that we lost, like other than land and lives. As soon as Palestinians were exiled from Palestine, the new settlers like went into the villages, took the clothes and dressed up in the clothes and copied our dancing to seem indigenous to the land. It's a very well documented activity that happened, and you can't be a people who have had their culture at every point kind of suppressed, because what, you know, you couldn't dance dabka in occupied Palestine across all of the different territories at certain points, and then up to the Intifada. Like, it's always been criminalized, whether it be poetry, whether it be just live music. Wedding in Galilee, one of the first sort of Palestinian films, shows how they could instantly just stop a wedding. Wow. And you had to go and get a permit for a wedding, and that's where a lot of the folk music took place, you know. So for rather than a criminalization of another culture, the promotion of Palestinian culture has always been something that has existed within the territories, within the camps, within further into the diaspora. So going to do a dabka lesson was always something of like generations were outside of Palestine, and that's one of the things they were doing. And those links to culture, and then people see it, people be surprised because of different narratives that they hear, that there is like a dance from Palestine, that there is music from Palestine, that there is poetry. And yeah, you can start to connect and collaborate, etc. It is a good way in.
I mean, it makes me think, right, like of people like Golda Meir, right, like one of the prime ministers of Israel, basically said that like the Palestinians aren't a people. And of course, like one of the ways that you fundamentally resist is by showing that like you have a culture, you have a history. And I think one of the ways that that's being manifested really powerfully even today, when there continues to be an erasure of Palestinians from their land, right? Like Palestinian cultures, that you have initiatives like in Toronto, we just had the Toronto Palestine Film Festival, which just wrapped up. I'm so glad you brought up, like, I never heard of that film, Wedding in Galilee, because, you know, it's such a crucial way in, again, whether we're talking about music or film or theater or dance, to resist, right?
Yeah. I mean, people are dead to like the political talk. They're dead to politics, and have been for ages, not because of the recent upheaval across all of the world that's sort of been happening in the last, especially since Trump has been president. Like, people have not suddenly grown tired of hearing political talk. It's always been the way. Every time you speak to people, and if you are always having to defend the fact that you exist and the fact that you like have a right to exist and have a history, people don't listen to your talk. One of the first things that ever got me into Palestinian activism was at a gig when I was speaking to someone, and I said that I was Palestinian, and the person just straight in my face was just like, but the Israelis are a beautiful race, you know? And I was just sort of like, there was the levels of things that went through my head at that time of like, what is wrong with this statement? It was just like I talked, and it just went overhead. I was also really bad at probably talking about politics then at the same time, but I couldn't really connect. I couldn't connect to her. But suddenly, if you play music, or you play, or you dance, or you have something from your heritage, from your culture, it is a starting block of a conversation. It's really pathetic that has to happen, but it is a very good and great way to get through, really.
Well, I want to pivot one more time. I mean, kind of picking up where we
Yeah,
are
sure.
and moving into talking about something else, because when we were talking about BDS, you said that we've had this success, right? Be it in the UK, but also here in Canada and North America, of getting into the mainstream, right? And so I mean, I've been involved in the BDS movement since it launched in Canada. In 2006, we had the first BDS conference in Toronto, and it was an incredibly powerful moment. And one of one of the strategies was like, we want to force the debate on our terms, right? We want apologists for apartheid have to say the words, right? Like Israeli apartheid, and then they have to justify why it's not apartheid. We want BDS to be on the lips of the prime minister, right? Like even if it's the prime minister denouncing the BDS movement, it's forcing them to take note, right? Like the Israeli government has had to pour millions and millions of dollars into like PR campaigns over the last decade just to fight BDS. So to me, those things are victories. But now one thing that is really concerning is they're trying to fight us in another arena. They're trying to fight, of course, Palestinians first and foremost, but also Jews who are critical of Israel, critical of Zionism. And so, for Jewish people that stand in solidarity with Palestinians, there's always been that label of like, you're a self-hating Jew if you stand up with Palestinians. And now they have this new definition of anti-Semitism. So people might have heard of this. I know it's been a huge deal in the UK. It's the IHRA, so the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is basically, it's an intergovernmental body. They do Holocaust awareness. I mean, a lot of their work we don't take issue with at all. I mean, it's very important to do education around the Holocaust. What is very insidious is that they have drafted this definition of anti-Semitism, which is, on the surface, actually very confusing and pretty useless. But then when you break it down, it gives all of these examples of what they call contemporary anti-Semitism. And 7 of those 11 examples specifically mention Israel. So right away you see that there is this, concerted attempt to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism or, hatred of the Jewish people. And it's incredibly dangerous, not only to Jews who, continue to face actual anti-Semitism, but it's incredibly dangerous to Palestinians as well, because it delegitimizes your, so I'm spitting a little bit because I'm getting so angry about this. It delegitimizes,
just for like social distancing, you being like in a red alert and stuff.
We're doing the ultimate social distancing. So this definition delegitimizes the Palestinian struggle for liberation and human rights. So I mean, we could talk about the definition, but one thing that I wanted to throw back to you, which is kind of funny, is one of these examples of anti-Semitism given in the definition says, if you say Israel is a racist endeavor, that is anti-Semitism. And so I know you guys in London recently had a very interesting campaign, an artistic campaign picking up on that with a group called Protest Stencil, which you're involved with. So tell us about that.
So, I mean, the IHRA definition was like the last kind of like, if you think about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, it was like one of the final stages of the attacks against him, especially. And the definition was being discussed everywhere, all over mainstream media, about the implementation of it, like who's going to take it, who's going to enforce it, etc., etc. So the Labour Party decided, or were in talks about whether they were going to adopt it. And then the discussion was, are they going to adopt it just as a definition, or is it going to be with the examples? One of the examples that you're saying, where Israel is a racist endeavor. And then basically, as soon as the motion passed, me and some friends in like the networks, etc., just noticed that everyone's kind of Twitter and everyone's Facebook status and Instagram was basically saying like, Israel is a racist endeavor. Like, they're not going to criminalize me again for speaking about the oppression of Palestinians. And so I was in touch with some people at Protest Stencil at the time, and they they went and did their magic, and within like within 24 hours of the motion being passed, London was covered in posters inside bus stop ads, so they looked like legitimate posters. Protest stencil, they had gone around all these different bus stops in quite iconic locations as well. I think one of them is with Big Ben in the background, I'm not sure. You know, and saying just like Israel is a racist endeavor. And because it felt so important at that time, I guess as protest stencil with people in solidarity with Palestinians, and as like they are with so many other causes. If anyone's not checked them out before, go on their Instagram page. It's unbelievable. And they were just so quick, and I guess they worked all night, went through, and they put them all over London. And it was on the news because it was mainstream news that Labour had adopted it. And then it was lunchtime on the day after, you had John McDonnell from the Labour Party, and you had Layla Moran, who is the first Palestinian member of Parliament, a Liberal Democrat for Oxford, on a news show. And it was basically the first thing was like, Israel is a racist endeavor. And it was just all over the BBC. And no one could really believe that. I didn't think it would get the reaction that it did, but they just did such a good job that it was everywhere, and it was all over social media, people going past taking pictures and stuff. And it brought the conversation to a fore again. It was just like, well, you've passed this, but what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. You know, are people then just going to condemn it? Like McDonnell had to condemn it on the television. Layla Moran threw us under the bus and saying like, that's not the kind of Palestinian I am. And, you know, it's such a statement that is so, I think to anyone that understands the history of Palestine, there is nothing contentious about it. And it just seemed like the natural thing to do. And like Protest Stencil were amazing at helping us out and doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's inspiring to see initiatives like that, because I think we're moving into a period right now where it's basically like for the pro-Israeli folks and for Zionists, the crimes that Israel has committed over the last decades are indefensible on their own terms, right? And all the documentation is there. And so there's this clear move now that if the occupation and Israeli apartheid are indefensible, well then what's the only option left is to actually shut down free speech and free expression around Palestine solidarity. And so I think, you know, that's clearly what's happening with the IHRA. It's disturbing because we're seeing it move now into like this concerted lawfare, right? Where if you are a restaurant that posts a poster out front saying, I love Gaza, like the restaurant food vendors in Toronto, you know, or if you are an academic who wants to host a freedom fighter like Leila Khaled, you know, you could have like the large Silicon Valley companies like Zoom and like Facebook and YouTube come and shut down your event, right? You know, they might even shut down this event right now. Well, which would maybe be an honor. I don't know.
Yeah. For the first one, that would be great, right? That's how you start. Yeah. I mean, you know, look at the other examples as well within the definition. Like, it is all just to those examples that mention like sort of Israel. It's all to quell that idea of legitimate investigation of what is going on now and what has gone on historically. And literally what is going to be happening in the future, because everything has got a reason, you know, like all the things. When we first started talking about doing this, they just signed the peace deal with the UAE, right? And I was not in a good space when you were like, do you want to come and talk about Palestine? And I was not really like in the mood to, so to speak. But it all has a future, like it's planned out, right? So this conversation is something that they've always been trying to stop it. And they believe that they've got some kind of legal backing to, and I don't think they've set, you know, it's not in law, but some places do adopt it. There's a question of the legality of it. Kind of like, to me, it makes no difference. Like, doesn't, you know, and I think that's the way. I think that's the way to move forward, because, you know, every meme always says it. Like, so many things have been legal that have been horrors across history, right? And right now there's a lot of things that are legal that are terrible. Whether it's like Priti Patel trying to like think to send UK asylum seekers to an island in Australia or wherever it is. Like, these things, if they're put in law, they're legal. You know, like, you've got to fight those things, right? So to me, it doesn't really make that much difference.
For sure. Well, there's you know, the battle will carry on, and it's, you know, for sure something that with independent Jewish voices that we've, you know, taken up in a really big way. And, you know, we're very intent on fighting the IHRA wherever it comes up. And so it's amazing to hear about these initiatives like Protest Stencil and blanketing the city of London with Israel as a racist endeavor, because that is
Totally
what they don't want to hear. So
no, exactly. The one thing, you know, it's like the people, right? Like, I mean, it might sound cheesy, but they tried to get rid of us, and they tried to bury the idea that there was any history. You know, like, they'll die and then we'll forget, you know, etc. It's not going to happen. You can't do that, you know. And so it's one of those things that it will continue, and especially now with the way that people are connecting and the look inside each other that everyone is doing at the moment, like, where they're really looking maybe that little bit deeper into why things are the way they are. Like, the amount of conversations I've had with people that had never really thought about UK's role in racism, the way that they're looking at that at the moment. These conversations keep building and building, and it's not going to stop. So
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's as good a place as any to leave it. So again, we've been having the first Firestarter chat with Kareem Samara, Palestinian musician based in London, where he is joining us from today. Check out Kareem's music, you know, the albums that we were talking about before with Ryan Harvey and Shireen, Lilith. Do you have like a website?
There's Kareem Samara Bandcamp that has some of my more recent solo work. There's a SoundCloud that people can check out, and yeah, I guess Spotify at some point. I'll get through it. The Ryan stuff is on Spotify, so the stuff with Ryan and Shireen, which is nice. That's all on Spotify and YouTube. So.
Right on. And then also, before we go, I mean, I do want to encourage everyone to check out the rest of this series, the Firestarter chat. It's going to be amazing.
It's gonna be great.
We're taking a couple weeks off, and then we're going to come back on October 15th. We're going to be chatting with Nidal El-Kheri, who is an incredible Palestinian illustrator and artist based in Amman, Jordan. We're going to be chatting with 47 Soul. Like, these guys are groundbreaking. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. Like, I mean, what these guys are doing with music too is just like unheard of. So that event with 47 Soul, it's going to be October 20th. October 22nd, we're going to be chatting with the guys from the Trafe podcast, which is an anarchist Jewish podcast of analysis and humor and culture. And then October 29th, the incredible Palestinian poet and spoken word artist Rafif Ziada. So all of that information is up on our website, ijvcanada.org. If you're on our Instagram, you can just like click the link in our bio. You can find Firestarter chats. All the info's there. A lot of these events are going to be on Zoom. We're going to do some on Instagram, some on Zoom. This has been kind of like a funny experiment for us tonight. First time we've done Instagram Live. So thank you, Kareem, for like indulging us. Man.
It's my first one as well. So.
And oh yes, and then of course, you know, these events we do are always free, but they're not free to like put on and organize. And so if people want to make a donation to support the work of IJV, you know, to support BDS organizing in Canada, to support organizing against the IHRA, again, go to our website, ijvcanada.org/donate. And Kareem, thank you once again.
Thank you, Aaron. Cheers. Thanks very much for having me, man.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care. Good night. See you.